John Evans. Welcome to another episode of One-on-One. Anyone who wears a badge to work knows they may not go home at the end of the day. There's a danger when you protect or serve the public. John Ingram has worn a badge to work now for almost 30 years, the last 11 as the sheriff in Brunswick County. He says law enforcement is not the same as it was when he started his career as a sheriff's deputy. They have new technology and new tools to help solve the crimes. But the challenges they face are much different too. Sheriff John Ingram, grandfather, father, husband, welcome to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast.
Thank you.
When you were growing up in Brunswick County, those so many years ago, did you see yourself wanting to be in law enforcement? Was that your career from the time that you were a young child, or how did this all develop into a career?
Not initially. I do remember in high school writing a where you want to be in 5 years type thing, and I'd expressed an interest in law enforcement, but no one in my family had ever really been in law enforcement to mention. And one day I was working out on the farm with my dad. I grew up on a farm, and at that time we were probably farming around 1,200 acres, which was fairly significant for about two people doing it.
Yeah.
And so one of the deputies, he's since retired with us, Don Marlowe. He pulled up and he was talking to my father, and he said, "Boy, you ever thought about going into law enforcement?" I said, "No, sir, not really." And he said, "Well, you should give it you should consider it." And so thought about it, and finally found the opportunity to get involved.
Was there an incident, or was there something that pushed you into it at some point in time? After thinking about it, you have to take that first step, obviously, at some point in time. What pushed you toward it?
I can't really, I think more about talking with, more people that were law enforcement officers involved with the sheriff's office, and finally just decided that that's where my heart was, and I wanted to follow that. And I'd actually started work with Brunswick Electric, which is a really good career.
Sure.
And I started out there reading meters. And,
actually going to people's homes and reading the meters?
When they used to, send them out.
Sure.
Now I think they do it all, remotely, but I was doing that, and I started putting myself through basic law enforcement training at night. And so I was really stretched thin for about 4 months or so. And when I made it through it, I decided I was not going to go directly into law enforcement. I wanted to wait for a while. And after almost a year, I decided, because you have about a year before your certification will die, and then you have to go back through it. So I went and applied at the sheriff's office, got on initially part-time, and then shortly thereafter full-time.
Okay, 1991, you joined the sheriff's office. Think back to 91 versus 2019 and how law enforcement has changed, and the challenges that John Ingram and the men and women of the entire department has changed. Could you have fathomed what A, you use now to solve crimes, but B, the kind of challenges your men and women face every day?
It's night and day. It's unbelievable. The law enforcement that I began my career in is no longer. It does not exist any longer. We are so far advanced, and we utilize technology that we'd never even thought of before when I started. And the challenges are very different as well. I always stress this to the folks that I work with, that I have the honor of working with, that we have to evolve with time. We can never get complacent or revert back to that old saying, that's the way we've always done it.
Right.
That's one of the things that I dislike hearing the most, because we continually have to evolve. And those days of having a radio, a flashlight, and a gun, and a revolver at that is when I started. There were 3 of us covering the county.
Wow,
one was
really?
out sick. If one was out sick, then that would be 2 covering the entire county. And it was a challenge. You really had to hold your own in some cases. I can remember being involved in a fight with, it was a domestic call where a man was beating on his wife, and I arrived, and I was trying to keep him off of her, and he had 3 brothers there, and all of them were kind of surrounding me, and he was coming at me, and I was trying to keep him off of her, and I think backup arrived about 20 minutes later.
That must have seemed like about 24 hours later.
That was a long 20 minutes trying to hold your own. And you can talk to officers coming up during that time. It was a common thing, especially in rural counties, to have backup quite a bit. It take a long time to get to you. A lot of times we relied on the beach towns, the beach police, the community, and or the highway patrol. Right. Closest backup, but it's changed significantly, and I mean, and I say for the better. I mean, we've continually advanced the technology and the equipment that our officers use to make it safer for them and make it safer for the community.
Did you ever come to any point in time in that career of yours where you just said, "Oh, I'm done"? I mean, did it ever come close to saying this is too much for me at any point in time?
Yeah, there were some times like that, and. It made me rethink where I was at in law enforcement, and there was a time that it took me from working with Brunswick County Sheriff's Office over to Columbus County.
Right.
And I'm in hindsight, I'm glad I did, but I hated leaving home. Brunswick County is my home, and I've always loved it, and I'm very thankful to have been afforded the opportunity to come back.
What did you learn from the sheriffs you served under? John Carr Davis, who was the sheriff when I got here in '92, and then Ron Hewitt, and then in Columbus County you went to work over there for Chris Batten. I imagine you picked things up from each and every one of them along the way.
Oh yeah. Well, John Carr was the kind that I just loved the man to death. I'm so thankful that he gave me an opportunity, but I'm also thankful that I got to serve under him, because if you made a mistake, you did something wrong or whatever, and it was really political back then compared to what it is now. He would call you in his office, and he may say a few choice words and kick you out of his office, and then turn around and take you to lunch.
Really?
He's a great man.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. And when Ronald took over, he did his best to take the agency forward and modernize it more, and a lot of things that he did really helped take us into the next century of law enforcement. He did a lot of good. I mean, you can't take that away from him, and the leadership styles from all of them were really different, but I was able to find good in all of it, and try to blend all of that to make the best. Chris was he had a big heart. He didn't have a ton of law enforcement experience at that time. He was taking over as sheriff, so that made that a unique situation. But he has a tremendous amount of common sense about him, and that's what he relied on. And he made a lot of good changes in that agency as well, and moved it forward. And I was fortunate to be able to work with him and help move it in a better direction. How
do you deal with the family worrying about you? I mean, you're a grandfather now, but as you were coming up in the ranks, you were a husband, you were a father. I imagine your wife, the kids, worried about Dad out on patrol, and everybody in law enforcement. Is that a conversation you had along the way for those of us who don't go out and put our lives on the line every day? How do you, as a family man and as a family during that time, have that kind of a conversation, try to calm your wife's fears and your child's fears?
Well, the biggest thing with the children, boys coming up, all boys, was to just, have conversations with them about it. If there was something going on, something that was making the news a lot, or people were having conversations about some really pressing topic, I would always try to sit them down and talk to them about it ahead of time. More so since I've been sheriff. Not so much so when I was much younger and running the drug unit and the SWAT team, and I kind of kept things separate as much as possible.
Sure.
Because the good thing about being a deputy is that you can, have a personal life when you're out in the public a little bit more.
Sure.
Than in this role as sheriff. And I enjoyed that a lot because I could, go just about anywhere and just be like, just enjoy it just like everybody else.
Sure.
Since being sheriff, I've made sure that, I would explain to my sons, if something was coming up or there was going to be something extremely controversial, I'd have conversations with them about it ahead of time and tell them, just to, if they have any concerns or whatever moving forward, to let me know, and I'd try to talk with them about it, but giving them the facts just like anybody else. And, with Grant, the youngest one, I don't have a lot of conversations about that. He loves to see the canines. That's his favorite thing.
Sure.
I think he would want me to get the canines out to his school every day if possible.
Sure, yeah.
He loves seeing the deputies out on the road, and I love that innocence. I love seeing our younger generations interact with law enforcement and respect and trust law enforcement, because there's been so many issues across the country that's caused people to feel otherwise. And that's something that we work very hard at doing over there, day in and day out. Is we know we have a tremendous amount of trust and respect from our community, but it's something that we don't take for granted. And working with our young people, that's just one way of doing that.
Can you imagine growing up when we did, with everything we have today, with social media and with all of the other, let's face it, threats to the young people, the teenagers, middle school, and now even elementary school kids are involved in a lot of this stuff. When we were there, if we got yelled at for watching too much TV, and I was outside almost all day long. I imagine you were the same kind of thing. You were working on a farm. Can you imagine growing up with the bullying and the social media and everything else like that the kids face today?
I think if I was growing up with social media and smartphones, I wouldn't be here today.
Really?
we joke about it all the time. Our generation, we're so thankful that we didn't have that.
Right.
I can remember starting out as a deputy, and our idea of a mobile phone would be to pull up to a phone booth, roll the window down, pull up close enough where you could reach it, and dial the 800 number to dispatch.
Right.
That's the way we did it.
Yeah.
And I'm very thankful that we didn't. I mean, it's a part of who we are now.
Right.
I mean, there's no mistaking that, and we don't shy away from that with, regards to how we operate in the agency, but it's something that we've had, the older generation has had to evolve into it. If you think about this younger generation, that's all they've ever known.
Right.
So they wonder why we're slow to catch on to different platforms of social media. Instagram, I still haven't figured that one out.
You're on it, though. I mean, I see stuff that you post,
on it,
or your wife posts as well.
Well, somehow I think they've been able to tie Facebook to Instagram, so if you post, it goes there. So I think that they've had mercy on me.
Trying to drag you into that way. TV, movies tend to glorify law enforcement work in a lot of ways. They solve crimes in an hour, and they get these things done. What don't people at home know about solving a narcotics case, about prepping when you're the head of a SWAT team? What don't people know about the intricacies and the planning that goes on? It's not just, you don't just walk out the door, I imagine, and walk up to a site. You, I would imagine, have plans of attack or wherever you go to these places, correct?
Yes, we do. We have recently been involved in some cases where we utilize this technology in a way that, as I said earlier, we have never imagined early on in my career. But we do that by looking at, number one, the phones, cameras, and there are cameras everywhere now. We can tap into those. A lot of neighbors now have these internet cameras. So when a thief thinks that they're breaking in and stealing something and taking the camera with them, well, they're on camera forever because it's in a cloud somewhere, the storage, and we're able to retrieve that information and expedite these cases using the MVAC that we recently purchased to pull DNA and submit that like never before.
Yeah.
And we continually see advances in this technology. You know, the thing is there's no replacement though for good old fashioned police work. There's no replacement for that, because you have to have somebody that's dedicated and relentless when it comes to solving these cases. And you know, that's a very difficult job to do. Some of the most underrated folks in the profession of law enforcement are general investigators, because you know, they want to solve the cases, but if you think of the volume that they get of property crimes.
Sure. Breaking and entering, breaking into cars and everything else like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes they don't actually have to break, they just enter because the car is
left
unlocked,
open. Yeah.
And windows are down and items are taken. And while I appreciate that people they feel a sense of security, at the same time, please don't ever take that for granted. I encourage them in all public forums to please lock your car, roll your windows up, because you can avoid a lot of things. A lot of times the criminal element looks for the path of least resistance. And in doing that though, we have to have officers that have very little, they'll have very little forensic evidence to go on. They'll have very little surveillance or anything like that to hang their hat on, and they really have to go with known criminal elements in the area and working with different entities to find a resolution to that case. And our folks do it day in and day out, and I did it, so I can appreciate what they're going through. But they are some of the most overlooked folks in law enforcement for the job that they do, and I truly appreciate it. But it's something that will wear you down, because you feel a sense as an officer that you want to solve every crime, and you want to help every victim. But there are times when it's beyond anybody's control or ability to do, because there's just absolutely no evidence to go on. And best case scenario, someone gives us information that leads us to an arrest. And sometimes that doesn't happen. And it's very frustrating.
What was a young John Ingram like? Were you an athlete? Were you a student? Were you a party guy? Were you're calm now, and you're a reserved guy. I mean, you don't. I've never been in your presence where you've raised your voice. I imagine it probably sometimes around the office or around the house. But what were you like? Have you always had this kind of demeanor all your life?
I've always been reserved. I really have. And everyone says I've been an introvert, and that's why going into law enforcement, especially going into a role as sheriff, it's a struggle. But as a young guy, I played football in high school. Wasn't talented enough to play anywhere beyond that. But I worked on a farm when most of my friends were at the beach having a good time. I was on the farm riding a tractor. I've cropped tobacco, you name it, I've done it, and I appreciate the value of hard work. And I would trade nothing for that experience.
Did you get your work ethic from your parents?
Yes, definitely. And you know, while a lot of people say, I want to get away from that life, or I'd prefer to be away from that, I truly appreciate it. And you know, my grandparents were the same way, very hard-working folks, and we didn't have money. We didn't come from money, and that really wasn't the issue. Or, you know, it's nice to be able to live in a decent home, and you know, but trying to be rich is not the thing. You don't get in law enforcement to be rich. You don't farm to be rich.
Right.
And that's really all I ever knew. You know, one of the things that really changed life for me as I knew it growing up was right after I'd started college over at Southeastern. My brother was killed by a drunk driver. And, you know, I share the story with at our DARE programs where we have our graduations to stress the importance of making good decisions, because, see, my brother made a decision to get in the car with a friend, a really good friend at the time. The young guy had a brand new Z24 car. You should be able to remember that.
Yeah, I do.
Super
yeah,
fast.
I do. Yeah.
Very few of us.
Anything
now
with
can
the Z
remember
in front of it was fast. Yeah.
And he had been drinking. It was a rainy night, and they went down a road that was right near Ocean Isle. That was very curvy road and had a big, huge oak tree. Still stands there to this day. And lost control, and there were 4 people in the car, and the girl that I was dating at the time received a call that her sister had been involved in a wreck. So we get in the car and go to the scene. She sees her sister. She's certainly injured, hurt. They said that someone was still in the car. I got to looking, and it was my brother.
Ooh.
And they got him. They finally got him out, and he died shortly thereafter. And that made a real lasting impact on me, and it had a devastating impact on my family, as you can imagine, like
Sure.
so many families go through. And so I share that with folks today, not for sympathy, but to stress the importance of making good decisions, and or trying your best. You're gonna make mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I mean,
sure.
Everybody wants to look at this one and that one and hold them to a standard different than themselves. But none of us are perfect. But if we can equip our young people with the tools they need to make better decisions and choices in life, then hopefully we can avoid tragedies like that.
Are the cases or the instances where you have a family member or a friend involved, whether it's in that instance like your brother, or whether it's a family member charged with a crime or a friend charged with a crime, are they the most difficult things for you to deal with as a sheriff when those kind of cases come up?
Well, certainly. I mean, they are, and
you got to balance the family versus the job at that point, right?
You do. My son was charged with DWI, my oldest, not once but twice, and there's nothing that I hide about that. I hope that I hope and pray that that never happens again, and that he keeps his life on the right path. But first and foremost, I'm their father.
Sure.
I don't worry about if something happens like that. I worry about the right thing being done. I do not worry about how I'm going to be perceived politically, because that is the least of my worries. My worries are
as
for
a
my
dad.
children,
Yeah.
like anyone else would be. And so I don't allow that to affect my decisions. I want them to take responsibility for their actions, like we all have to. And it's very difficult, and I'm sure that we see it a lot with. We have well over 300 people in our organization now, and with that number of people, they're going to have family members that get involved in some kind of criminal activity, inevitably. And when they do, it's tough on them.
Yeah.
I see that, and I understand. I mean, it's not something that we make them do or
Right.
aid them in doing, but it weighs heavily on them. But the thing that I don't want anybody to ever misinterpret is that I worry about it politically. I don't.
Yeah.
I worry about my kids and my family like anybody else would.
Going through the sheriff's office and then serving under Sheriff Hewitt, the circumstances ended up becoming the sheriff of Brunswick County in the long run. But seeing how something like that played out for Sheriff Hewitt, is that something you learned from and made it so that you didn't maybe follow or learn something from his tragic ending to the way his life ended, his career and then his life?
It was very tragic. And yes, I do try to learn from all of the situations that I've been exposed to, and certainly that. You have to be ever mindful of your actions. And I tell all new sheriffs that come into office that I have an opportunity to speak with, never make that office about you. That office has to remain about the people. Mm-hmm. And when you do make it about you, then you're going down a path of destruction. And although you may have the best intentions in the world, and it's not going to end well. And I saw that.
Yeah.
But again, there was so much good that come from what he did. It was a very difficult time. It really was. And it was a very difficult time not only for the agency, but for the community, getting past that and moving forward. And so one of the things that we did is early on when I took over, we started what's called a Citizens Academy. That's not a publicity stunt. It is simply designed to educate our community about the office of sheriff, which we've had that conversation. It's not a department.
It's a sheriff's office, yes it is, right. Which you told me about in front of about 200 people not long ago. And in doing so, we educate them about the capabilities and the limitations of the sheriff's office. And we discuss how not every crime is solved in an hour like you see on CSI. Right.
But at the same time, we try to recruit volunteers. And that program has, when it started, we started recruiting more and more and more. Now we have well over 250 volunteers that are active. They're working in animal services. They're integrated in almost every aspect of the agency, which is a great thing because that adds a layer of transparency unlike we've ever seen before in the history of our sheriff's office. So I try to keep encouraging more people to sign up and go through the academy, and then we find more and more areas for them to volunteer to keep the public involved in their sheriff's office so that we don't ever have a situation where we go back to what we had before.
Right.
And it's kind of a checks and balances for me. And I try to surround myself with people that are not yes men, which Charlie. Mm-hmm. He's not a yes man. Charlie will speak his mind, and I appreciate that. And they can all speak their mind without fear of retaliation from me. And I appreciate it. If I'm sitting in a room with 5 or 6 people and everybody agrees with me, there's probably a problem.
Yeah.
And when I have that, where everybody's shaking their head in the past, I would be like, okay, let's slow down a minute. There's no way all of you can agree. In fact, we had a conversation earlier about a personnel matter before I got over here, and kind of the same situation. I don't want them just to agree because they think that's what I want to hear. I want them to truly speak their mind. And that's what I would encourage other sheriffs to do, or chiefs of police, leaders in law enforcement, to surround themselves with people that want to see the agency, want the best for the agency, and are good, strong leaders, and at the same time are given the ability to speak their mind without fear of retaliation.
When it is time for you to go out there every 4 years and get support, how difficult is it maybe to take that law enforcement hat off and put that political hat on? You've told me before that you're not a politician, but every 4 years you do have to run for re-election.
That's true.
How difficult is it for you?
I can't even put it into words. It's
really?
Extremely difficult for me because, well, number one, it's like getting a report card. Mm-hmm. You're getting graded on the performance, and it can be very humbling. It can also be very frustrating because inevitably people will spread lies, and it'll get passed around on social media, right, or half-truths, misinformation designed to do nothing but hurt you politically and try to support somebody else's agenda. And I've had to learn to develop thick skin because I've always been somebody that's hit controversy head on. Like if I know someone has an issue with me, I don't sidestep it, I go right to them.
Mm-hmm.
And we try to have a conversation. But in that arena, it's a little different. You can't run all those things down and get caught up in that. And at the same time, I can't let my duties as sheriff take a back seat to politics. So I have to make sure I'm taking care of the office of sheriff first and foremost if I win or lose. Because if I do get beat, then I'm going to be doing my job when I get beat.
And it seems to me, and I thought you were going this way, but you know, even people who don't vote for you are in Brunswick County, so you have to serve them if they support you or if they don't support you, correct?
I spoke to a group not long ago, and I said, look, you know, right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm your sheriff, and I appreciate you allowing me to serve. If you didn't vote for me, I'm here for you too. It does not matter to me. I don't check whether you voted for me or not. I don't check what party affiliation you belong to. If you call for help, we're going to help you. And we're going to do our very best to help resolve the situation that they're, you know, whatever they're experiencing. That does not matter to me. You know, people have differences of opinion. I think in this past election, a lot of votes were cast simply because of someone's party affiliation. I have no problem with that. Mm-hmm. I would encourage people moving forward to understand how important the office of sheriff is and how unique it is, and that it is worth the time to understand completely what a critical role that plays in a person's life within a county, and educate yourself about the candidates and their experiences, because it is extremely important. And if you think about the office of sheriff being the one position that answers completely to the citizens of the county.
Right, yeah.
And it's a constitutionally established office. There's a lot of controversy going on now across the state with some of the sheriffs that are making certain decisions to do certain things. And I think that people are understanding more and more how critical a role a sheriff plays in law enforcement. And again, I appreciate it because I don't answer to any other politician or entity other than the people. And I give my cell phone number out all the time. It's on my business card. Mm-hmm. If you need me, call me. And I mean that. Yeah. I'm sure that several people could tell you that they called me on a whim just to see if I would even answer. And I did. So, and if I don't answer, I call them back. Right. But it's important for people to understand that process and know the people, the candidates for sheriff. But it's a very difficult job because you have to also, you know, you have people that inevitably that work with you that are enthusiastic and they want to support you in a campaign, but you have to make sure that all laws are complied with, yeah, and that there are no, there's no one working on the clock and campaigning at the same time, or that no county or government property is being used to do that, and you have to make sure all of that.
Every I is dotted and every T is crossed, right?
Yes, and that is nerve-wracking in itself. Mm-hmm. Because the last thing you want to do is discourage people, but at the same time you have to make sure everything is accounted for. Yeah. And so I'm not a politician. I do have to run. Yeah. And I will humbly ask people for their vote, but I am not going to allow politics to interfere with the operation of that sheriff's office. And I've told many people, and I continue to tell them, you may support me in an election, you may donate to my campaign, but if you commit a crime, you're going to be held accountable. Just like anybody else, it's not going to get you a free pass. And we don't have any get out of jail free cards. Yep. And you know, that's just the course of doing business. But if they want law enforcement, and good law enforcement, solid law enforcement, that's what they're going to get with me.
When John wants to just get away, I know with 300 or so people in your office, law breakers everywhere, but when John wants to get away, and Michelle and Grant, and you just want to put everything to the side and want to relax, what do you do?
A lot of times, stay right at home. I love to get out in the yard and work. And you know, up until about 3 years ago, we had a 24-acre farm, so that consumed a lot of my time. especially trying to keep things mowed, neat, and we sold that about 3 years ago. I moved in a community over off of 211, and so now I have a yard that takes me about 20 minutes to mow with a push mower.
Okay.
And it used to take me about 10 hours to mow with one of those big mowers and a tractor.
Right. And you get exercise at the same time.
Yes, which I need.
Yeah.
And so we work in the yard. We will go to the beach. We just enjoy being around each other as a family.
Can you put a pair of headphones in and get the world and let the world away?
No, I don't do that.
No.
And my phone is always on. Since I've been sheriff, there may have been 2 times when I have not answered the phone if Charlie had to handle it. Just it might have been 3 because I've had 3 operations. Right. I think.
Yeah. Especially one during Florence last year.
Yeah, that was an experience. But we, other than that, the phone's on, and but it can be stressful and frustrating, and the biggest part of it is personnel, because you want to have the very best people you can serving the citizens of the county. At the same time, life happens, and they face a lot of challenges in their lives, and so we have to be there for them as well, and try to address that. And it's very demanding, but I am surrounded by really good people that have the best interest of the office and the citizens at heart, and so they really make my job much easier than you would envision.
Hiring well makes your job a lot easier, doesn't it?
It does. And
go ahead.
I would like to say, we have a philosophy around the office. We don't have employees. Okay, we have coworkers, staff members, but it's not employees, because I don't like the way that sounds. All of us have a role to play, and my job is no more important than anybody else's job there, whether it's the detention staff or telecommunicators or the deputies or our housekeeping staff. We all have to play a role, and we all have to do it and come together as one to make that happen. I've said that from day one, and I say it now, and I believe it. And that's why I am so passionate about making sure that we take care of our people, because inevitably that makes for a better environment to take care of the citizens of the county.
You've been very gracious with your time today. I have one more question. I hope to join this club soon. You're a member of it. Is there anything better than being a grandfather?
No, I don't think so. It's a wonderful experience. It's a very special feeling and time, one that I never really fully understood until I became one. And at the same time, I have a very young son myself.
Right.
After remarrying, and so between all of them, they're going to either kill me young or keep me young to grow old.
But I think they keep you humble too. I think it grounds you in the time that I've gotten to know you a little bit. You're grounded by your family.
They do keep me humble.
Yeah.
It's not, I'm not the sheriff to them, and that's what I like. I put my pants on like everybody else. My wife is quick to tell me you're not the sheriff at this house. Yeah. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. Sheila's the same way with me. I mean, it's and the both of us, and I've said, and people who listen to this, and I'm saying this for about the 10th time, is that they're probably sick and tired of me saying how much Sheila has meant to our family's success, because my job's not 9 to 5, and neither is yours. Yeah. But I imagine Michelle and your family, she is such a key to your family as well. You feel the same way?
Definitely. She is a true blessing, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. She is the one that is always there without fail for me to lean on in tough times. When I'm going through some of the most difficult times in my life, she is the one that's been there for me, and is my rock. I mean, I know people say it often, but I just cannot imagine life without her. Yeah. And she, I don't deserve her, that is for sure. And I am so thankful that she's a part of my life and is the one that really keeps me sane a number of times.
And keeps you grounded and keeps you going on day after day.
Yes.
Sheriff, it's good to see you. I appreciate you taking the time. Your time is very valuable, but I wanted to peek behind that curtain a little bit and get to know John Ingram. I'm glad you came in and spent time with us today. Thanks.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thanks to Sheriff John Ingram for sharing his time and his personal story with us this week. He is active on social media. Most often it's on Facebook and on Twitter. And the Sheriff's Office website is brunswicksheriff.com. Before we go, I'd like to ask you a favor. Please subscribe to the One-on-One with John Evans podcast and leave us a rating or a review if you would. That would really help us with our listings on many of the podcast apps and help us bring in even more new listeners. I'm John Evans. Thanks for being with us for this week's episode of One-on-One.